The Quest Podcast, Funds Industry Conversations.
Hello, podcast listeners, and welcome to this episode of the Quest Podcast with me, Danny Lawler. If you're new to the Quest Podcast, do hit like and subscribe. And if you have somebody in your life that's into this sort of thing, do feel free to share the podcast with them too. The release of this podcast is timed to coincide with the end of the 180-day transition period for EMIR Refit. Now, EMIR is the European market's infrastructure regulation, and EMIR Refit was a revamp of that regime, which kicked in at the end of April 2024. So for this episode, I'm joined by two EMIR experts from the fintech firm Fundrex, Aoife Storey and Michelle Kehoe. And we chat about what it was like at the time that EMIR Refit came into effect. We had anticipated some challenges on whether they proved to be true or not, what new challenges have arisen that we maybe didn't expect back then, and generally how firms are coping with the new reporting and oversight requirements and where the standards are at. Speculating some views from the central bank. And we also chat about how EMIR in other jurisdictions, so the UK version and the Australian version, for example, how they're playing out and some changes that are coming there as well. So the podcast begins with Aoife talking us through some of the changes that were brought about by EMIR Refit.
The Quest Podcast, Funds Industry Conversations.
Welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here. Thanks for joining me and taking time out. So I don't know if you want to take us back to the run into the 29th of April when EMIR Refit was coming into effect.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. So it was a lead up to the 29th of April, which was the go live for EMIR Refit. A lot of changes came in with that date. So the fields is one of them in terms of what we were looking at in terms of data from the trade repository. So what was being submitted, there were a lot more mandatory fields that had to be included from a submission side that we had to ingest from a solutions-based oversight view and standardize that and then produce oversight of data quality on those additional fields. So that was one of the large changes. So it was 170 or so fields to 203, I believe. And then the other changes that was more effective to the industry was the entity responsible for the reporting. So where the responsibility lay with the oversight. So being the fund to the management company.
Yeah, so they wanted to make it clearer whose neck was on the block for making the submission, and they also clarified that for UCITS and AIFs, it was the UCITS Manco and the AIFM that was responsible, not directly the fund. So in the run-in, obviously we had all of this work to do, quite a few changes brought about as a result of EMIR Refit, and we anticipated quite a few challenges and difficulties and that there might be a few roadblocks as we hit the 29th. Michelle, do you remember what those challenges that we anticipated would be and what the big ones were?
Yeah, so I think the first being the access to data. So trade repository data is essential to this process, and you're relying on the trade repository to produce that data. So that being your DTCCs, Regis or Univistas. So we were anticipating, there was possible going to be downtime, technical issues, etc. And thankfully for the majority, that was overcome in the first few days of Refit, because you can have all the data validation checks prepared and everything, but if you don't get that data in and you don't have the actual oversight in the physical data, you can't do too much. So it was good to see that the likes of DTCC had, a robust plan in place to, for those technical changes over the weekend, and they were rolled out in the first few days, which was good on their side of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And they did, it seemed from the outside anyway, put a lot of effort in to be ready for the day. Yeah. I do recall as well, in the run into EMIR Refit, there was some discussion around the extent to which brokers would be ready for this, because often one side is relying on the broker to report, and now and particularly if you're outside of the EU, you had more information to report and more things for those brokers to do that was kind of an add-on generally for their service. How did the brokers respond?
So it was, I guess, up to the clients to notify the brokers on the changes in one aspect, and it was really down to the testing pre-April that the clients were relying on, what was done in their UAT environments to say if it was being rejected or accepted with the new submission under the new schema. Brokers did have that time, that transition period, I guess, that 180-day grace period to kind of get compliant with the new schema, and that's something that we're still seeing as a challenge across some, that we have a large rejections rate across some clients currently, where they're still not complying to the new submission type.
Well, we'll come to the 180 days there in a moment, but There was kind of a discussion that maybe if you had a counterparty or broker that was responsible for reporting but was having difficulty for whatever reason, or you weren't comfortable that they were hitting the mark in terms of the standards, that maybe one of the options would be to move to different counterparties or brokers. Is that something that's really played out, or have the brokers kind of stepped up, and does it look like they're getting where they need to be?
I think it has, yeah. I think the brokers have. Like, as I said, that kind of lead up with testing and what we've seen to date, yeah, I don't think there's been much challenges post-refit with all the new checks that have to be included.
So with the brokers performing and the counterparties giving access to data, how was the 29th of April and the days after?
I think the days after is what showed that it went well. You know, once it did take some of those counterparties a few days or a few weeks to actually comply, and as Aoife said, there is still some rejection rates high out there for certain counterparties, so there is still that issue. But I think overall, the majority, the numbers that we're looking at now, the submitters and the counterparties have come in line to the new regulation, and you are seeing that improvement across the board. Whereas the first maybe week or 2, 3 weeks, you would see still the older submissions because you'd still see them submitting on older fields. But now you can really see, that's, the minority, not the majority of what you're seeing across the kind of book of submissions.
And were there challenges that we saw that you weren't anticipating beforehand?
I think maybe things like asset types like futures, for example. There was fields prior to refit, like a quantity field that would have to be populated, whereas now we've changed from a quantity model to a total notional quantity, which is a different factor of a quantity. So it just means the reconciliation on those fields, for example, the amount field is just not as straightforward as it was before, and they're kind of just some challenges that maybe wasn't anticipated, because you're anticipating change for additional fields, but you're not anticipating change that the whole drastic way you look at an asset type will change. But I think as time went on, it's just kind of adapted to the new.
Has that settled now? Is that your sense?
It has settled, exactly. So it's just more how you interpret, a notional quantity versus a quantity, which is just one example. Yeah, definitely just interpreting it, to the new model and ensuring that your record that you're using for your completeness matches that. But that was, I think, an issue that everyone kind of would have seen. It wasn't something that was pre-empted or you wouldn't know it's really coming. It was kind of just one that was sprung on. And
how did you find the regulator responses during this, like ESMA and the central bank? Were they good at, when you come with a question like that everybody has, right, and isn't necessarily anybody's fault, for want of a better phrase, were they good at kind of...
I think if you had the oversight in place, like the completeness that Michelle mentioned, if you can show that it's been reported, as in the trade repository like DTCC actually have it on their trade state reports on the ETD side, but the factoring is maybe incorrect on the total notional that Michelle mentioned, the client is still checking that it's compliant with what it's reported. If the amount isn't as it should be, then there's factoring like from a FundRec side that we would do on the templates, and that would match back then to the actual position level. But yeah, no, from what we've seen, it's either coming in line with the kind of 180 days coming to a close, how they're being submitted is more coherent, I guess, across all future types, and we have ways to do the matching.
And the regulator and ESMA being kind of responsive in terms of giving you guidance of what they would expect?
No, we actually haven't asked them, or our clients haven't either. It's kind of, this is how ETDs are reflected now in the trade state report, and this is how you're matching it back to your internal book of record. There was no guidance provided, but we know what we had to do from a completeness standpoint. And
so you mentioned 180 days there a couple of times. You want to explain what that is?
Yeah, so the kind of grace period, or the transition period as the central bank call it, is I guess the day from the 29th of April go live for EMIR Refit up till the 26th or 28th of October. There's the 180 days to backdate all of your submissions to make sure that they're compliant with the new regulation. So that's next week or the week after, that will be hitting that date, and all clients will be looking at their kind of post-refit solution, making sure that it's in line with the new guidelines, and anything that hasn't been changed or backdated will have to be done.
And how are firms doing? Are we going to get to the 180 days and it'll be easy?
From our perspective, a lot of firms have completed that aspect already. A lot of everything has been backdated. That kind of brings us back to the numbers of that what isn't compliant is a minority. So you're seeing those older fields still populated on a very small amount of trade. So from what we can see, most counterparties have been compliant in or submitters in backdating already. It seems to be the majority is done in submission wise.
Or there was a question about if a trade lapses or matures within the 180 days, does that have to be brought up to the regulation standard? And the answer I've seen across the board is yes. If it's in the 180 day, and if it's still a live trade, it should be.
Yeah.
But then again, if it lapses and it's at post 180 days, there's no trackability or tracking on that trade anymore. So it's advised to make sure that it's backdated if it's post.
So it sounds like from an industry perspective that the process has gone quite well. The standards are quite good. The engagement by brokers has been decent and their reporting levels are quite good. And as we get to the end of the 180 days, industry's in a decent place and as I said, the standards are quite good. So if I were in a firm that was off that we were getting a lot of rejection reports, we weren't ready for the full EMIR refit, it sounds like I'm behind the curve and I'm potentially in danger.
Yeah, in danger maybe. But I think if you are reviewing the rejection side, as you said there, if you're seeing a large amount of rejections, which is readily available, if you don't have an oversight in place even from solution based, but you have the DTCC data, you'll be able to see why is it rejected, what's my issue with the rejection, and what action needs to be taken. So that is, I know it's XMLs at the moment that are taken from DTCC, but that can be transferred into a readable format. And I would, I guess, coming up to 180 days, from what we know from talking to the central bank, there will be more queries, I guess, around non-submissions, rejections, errors and omissions as well. So it's something to be aware of.
Yeah, and of course, no more than the industry, but the regulator themselves have been at this for a while, so they have a good understanding of what to expect, and if something shows that's out of the ordinary, they will not be slow about kind of bring that to the attention of the reporting firm.
Yeah, and I think there's a separate calc that we're looking at as well on Fundirect side, but also in the industry, and we've talked about it a few times, is the significance threshold calculation, which I won't go into too much detail, but it's basically looking at your errors and omissions. So that is on an activity level or a position level, what your threshold is based on how much you're trading and what your category of trade is. So that will really show you if you're above or below that threshold, if you should be reporting it to the central bank or not. And it's a calc that we're looking at the moment, and it is something that we've brought to the attention to the central bank. They said they don't know what they're going to do next, but it's something that people should be looking at post 180 days. So
yes.
Just errors and omissions is kind of the main title of that one.
As a useful number, and again, you're probably monitoring that for trends and hopefully trending in the right direction. So you might find that number is at a certain level today, but in due course that might reduce over time as experience and expertise gets better.
Yeah.
So then we're at the end of the period almost, right? So we're into kind of business as usual. The way that I see firms, they're certainly much more aware of their EMIR obligations, and generally they're delegating the reporting obligations. So their role is oversight of how their delegate is performing. And they tend to be much more on top of that than they might have been a little while ago in terms of understanding who's doing what and making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do and that the reports are going in, and if there are issues that they're getting followed up on. Certainly that's the way I've seen it with firms. They're way more on top of this. Is that your sense as well, that they're...
Absolutely. They're definitely more on top of it, but also they're more aware. It's not just what has been submitted to the trade repository. It is that rejection piece as well, and having that full oversight of, yes, I might have, X, Y, and Z trades reported, and that's great. And the data quality is great on them, but it's those ones that aren't reported as well, like making sure that your oversight model is not just the rec and what's gone in. It's more, okay, well, what's missing? Is everything included? And that full scope. And I think that's what Refit has really shown the industry, that it's not just about what's on that DTCC or trade repository report, it's what isn't on it and that full picture. And I think it's just put a bit of perspective and reality on, you have to look at it, everything as a whole, not just kind of what's good, and just really focusing on the parts that aren't, and then that's where your internal process comes in to make those better. And I think the industry as a whole has really taken that seriously, which is good.
And what's the central bank's perspective, or what are we seeing there in terms of their levels of activity on EMIR?
As in oversight?
Oversight and feedback to firms.
Haven't had much, I don't think. Kind of with 180 days was kind of given to them as there won't be much interaction between central bank and the firms with queries, etc. I think there's been the odd query.
But likely to ramp up then as we get to the other side.
That's what I mean, with 180 days it will ramp up, and the expectation will be higher.
Yeah, and certainly they have a dedicated team that's been looking at this for a while, and I know that there are firms where they've had that supervisory interaction from the central bank for whatever reason has prompted it. And they do tend to get something like a risk mitigation program, an action plan for steps to take to improve, which is quite a normal approach for the central bank when it comes to supervision, which is fine. But we may well start to see even more of that as this 180-day period runs out. And, if they have a sense that there are firms who've fallen behind, which I guess could be obvious enough to them from the reporting that they're receiving in.
Yeah, from their own review of what they're seeing from the trade repository submissions. And then I know from an industry point of view, the Univista trade repository, that's just something that we've brought to the central bank a few times in terms of oversight. So DTCC from Go Live, we've had data from them. Everyone has access to what they need from a Go Live perspective. Regis is the same, and then Univista, if you haven't submitted the trades on behalf of yourself, or you're not the submitter, you don't have oversight of your trade state reports. And that is something that we're continuously chasing the central bank on, I guess, to raise with ESMA, or for ESMA to come down on Univista as to what their plan is to get that data available to for oversight. The date that it was provided by Univista was sometime in November, but that's been pushed out for a number of months since Go Live. So that's just something to be aware of. Yeah.
So does that mean now, after the 180 days is up, we get to put our feet up and forget about EMIR Refit? It's done? We get to move on?
No. There are other aspects, as Michelle said, kind of outside the trade state checks. So there's margin checks, there's collateral, data quality. One of the changes post-refit was the collateral and the margin and the trade information was on one report, whereas now that's split. So there's just kind of a few extra layers of oversight that have to be done on different workflows that are coming in from the trade repositories. Just something that we've noticed from working with them directly, what we need to do.
So that's ongoing work that's going to develop over the next little while, is it?
Yeah. It's kind of from Fundworks' perspective, it's on our roadmap for Q4, but the trade level, the completeness, the accuracy on the trade state is great, and as Michelle said, the rejections is really important, but then the oversight of the margin data quality, the overall MIS, all that kind of falls into your oversight model, and all of that is quite important, like what you're reporting to the board, etc.
And that's going to get more focus as we get to the other side?
Yeah.
Okay. And then in the UK, of course, not to be left out, they're doing some work at EMIR as well.
Yeah, we never leave them out. Yes, so their go live was the 30th of September. So they've gone live now for a number of days, 2 weeks in. I think firms have really took learnings from the EU side. UK seems to have gone very seamless. We're still seeing the same issues with the Univista side. That hasn't been improved. But in terms of DTCC and Regis, it was a seamless transition in terms of access to data. It just flew as expected. And in terms of the field we mentioned earlier on the future contract types, it was the same. It came in line, so it's the same things we've been seeing across the board. I think the FCA side did a great job in actually.
So that's the UK version of EMIR Refit.
Exactly. So it's the UK
and they've managed to learn off their neighbours.
Exactly.
Why not?
Exactly. And firms who are participating, very seldom we have a client that just has the UK side. You more than likely have both. So I think firms really took that learning and they were just ready to go.
And if you have both, is it, are the two sides the same, or are there differences that might make it?
The inputs are different, and there's the data validation checks. There's a few slight differences, but overall it's very much the same checks, bar a few tweaks here and there. But the UK refit reporting is different. The inputs are different because nothing could be the same.
No, absolutely not. And then more internationally, I know in Australia we have something that's kind of similar. So it's not just the EU and our friends across in the UK that are subject to this, but...
So there's ASIC, and there's the ASIC rewrite, which is basically the EMIR equivalent regulation in Australia. And then there's MAS, which is another one, which is also another refit that's taken over the APAC region, which is go live the 21st of October. So that's something we're working on at the moment as well. Just we have a handful of clients that would be in that region, and we're working through the data validation rules. It's very similar or coming in line with what we're doing on the EU side, and I think that was the driver for the refit on the ASIC side, is to get that in line with what we're doing over in Europe.
So obviously their gaze is over this way to see what they can learn rather than and obviously they have the benefit then of seeing how it's gone here and anticipating what the challenges might be and trying to get ahead of that. But as a trend internationally, you can see that regulators are interested in your use of derivatives and who are the two counterparties and seeing if they can join the dots. So EMIR might have originated here, but through the likes of international organizations like IOSCO, it spreads out. So plenty to do then, even though we're almost past the 180 days. I think we watch with interest how the market reacts and how the standards drive and how the rejections probably drop, and how, if you are an outlier in that, I guess it gets harder for that not to be obvious, and then probably, expect an interaction to get you into the right place. Easy as that.
Easy as that. Pretty much.
Well, thanks very much for joining me. I really appreciate that. It's great to get that insight from people who really know the way around EMIR and EMIR Refit and what's happening here and abroad, because it has been high in the agenda with everything that's gone on over the last period. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Danny.
The Equest Podcast, Funds Industry Conversations.